Welcome back to the Author Spotlight. I'm so excited about our next guest, Mika, 𝐕𝐈𝐈𝐄.com, and she has written a book called My Year Without Him. You know, I remember when I was a youth pastor in Waynesville, Missouri at Fort Leonard Wood, and the turnover in the congregation was 40% per year. And I can remember spouses that were going to Korea for 18 months. They were being deployed all over the world. And it was just hard to understand and imagine how a couple that were raising young children could be gone that long. Well, this next mother not only figured out how to do it, she wrote a book about it. And so I'm happy to welcome to the show, Mika. Welcome to the Author Spotlight. How are you today?
I'm great, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's really great because I've known about your book for a little bit. In fact, you've been writing this for some time, and I know we helped you launch this book recently. What motivated you to write My Year Without Him?
So I started writing the book more as like a journal. It was the last year that we lived overseas, and my husband was serving as a commander. And so I really wrote to cope, if that makes sense, like what I was doing, what I was feeling, the challenges, the obstacles, as well as the rewards of just, living without him physically there, raising our kids, working, those kinds of things. So it's really more of, it started out as definitely a coping mechanism for his absence.
So did you find it? So you're journaling, you're raising the kids, you're doing the day to day. Now I think you have 4 children, right?
3 children.
Okay, 3 children. I guess
Yes.
it probably seemed like 8 or 10 since you were a full-time mom, right? So you basically go from being this happy married couple to being a single mom in a lot of regards, right? Did you have any anger feelings, or what was going on in your head?
Well, taking a little bit of a step back. So we've been married over 20 years, and my husband has been away for military service multiple times. This was actually his 10th deployment.
Oh my goodness.
And of course, this was a long one. It was total is about 15 months. So a little over a year. And I thought, well, maybe people could understand, or, I get a lot of questions about being a military wife. I mean, throughout his career, I've always had that. I think because I'm somewhat unconventional. And I think a lot of military spouses these days are, we're professional, we're educated, we have our careers, and we do sacrifice a lot to help, our partners or spouses, whether it's a husband or wife, serve the country. And we do, I think a lot of it goes unnoticed, truthfully. I think that, you asked me what pushed me to kind of write it was journaling, right? But what pushed me to publish it was the whole mental health, the whole mental health really pandemic that has been going on because of the physical pandemic. I think that there's just so many challenges that people go through, and everybody has a story that nobody even knows about. So I think it's good to talk about it, to get it out.
Well, I think you open it up for a lot of spouses to verbalize it and get their thoughts out. I mean, you and your husband own a travel company. In fact, your travel agency, I was all scheduled to go to Japan during the Olympics, and I was all excited and gung-ho about living in Japan for 2 weeks, taking in the festivities around the Olympics. And like you said, pandemic shut everything down. And so what emotions does a spouse deal with? Is there some anger issues when the deployment happens? And then what about just how do you keep up on the day-to-day communication of what's going on? Do you have a Google Doc or something you share? Are you communicating through WhatsApp? And how much of the communication is restricted there, depending on your spouse's level of security? How often do you get to talk to them?
So that's okay. So I'll start with the first question. Of course, you go through a lot of different emotions as a spouse. Obviously, yes, you're angry. But sometimes, you're like, hey, I got this. Like, I can do this and everything's going to be fine. There's sadness, there's irritability, um, there's those days that, you are like, wow, I'm really all by myself. But you got to figure it out, right? And I think that as a wife and as a mother, especially if you have children, they're watching. So, you can't really fold. That's not really an option. You really have to keep the energy up in the home. You have to keep them going. Routine is super important
Yeah.
when people are deployed, because the big change is them being out of the house, right? So the routine of the house needs to be really, really structured and similar, because that provides comfort.
Did your
Um,
kids go through some emotional swings and some
absolutely.
challenges like that? And how did you deal with that?
Absolutely. Well, I can tell you they were all really different. So our son was a senior in high school. Our daughter was a freshman in high school, and our youngest was just going into junior high.
Oh, wow.
Um, and our son kept pretty busy, but he would have those moments of sadness where he really wanted to talk to his dad. And I would tell him to text him, because obviously during this last deployment, we could text. Let me back up a bit. So in the 20 years we've been married, when he first started deploying, we would send an email, and then, a day later he would respond. Or he could call us from a phone after he stood in line for 15 minutes to talk for 5 minutes. I mean, that's how it used to be for the wars, especially with Iraq, when he was in Iraq. But then over the years, it's evolved. We have Skype, FaceTime, those kinds of things. And back to what you were asking, sometimes, yes, it's restricted what he can say. But of course, as a military spouse, we evolve and change, and our relationship has done the same. So we kind of have some code, I guess you could say, code words and things that we would say to each other, that we knew what the other person was saying without saying it, if that makes sense. um,
So this wasn't your first rodeo. You guys have been through this together, and so you kind of knew what the buzzwords were on
right,
kind of the level of urgency.
right.
Um, did I mean your kids being able to text? I'm sure there's some times where they needed some FaceTime to
Yes,
just hear a word of affirmation from dad, right?
yes, of course. Well, and we would try to FaceTime with him at least once a week.
Uh-huh.
Obviously, everybody's schedules. We were very fortunate this last time because he was so close. We lived in Japan and he was in Afghanistan, so the time difference was actually over only 4 hours. All the
Okay.
other deployments he had, we were on opposite days and nights, so that was a lot more challenging to talk. But yes, and of course, when they talked to him, they all wanted to talk to him. Never got enough time to talk to him. Wanted to tell him everything. So I mean, it's a balance, right? And but I'm really proud of my family um, for doing what they did.
So the numbers bear out that military families divorce at a higher rate, and certainly deployments don't help, right? And so what was the toughest part for you during the deployment, and then how did you journal it in the book?
Probably the toughest part for me was our youngest at the time, again, was going into junior high. Towards the end of the deployment, I could guess why. There's a lot of different reasons why, but she was struggling with her mental health, and she attempted she attempted an overdose. And so I had to get a hold of my husband in another country and
Mm,
notify him, and then they were going to bring him back.
mm,
Um, for what it was, maybe God was in our corner. Actually, I believe he absolutely was.
mhm,
He had actually just relinquished his command, which means he had turned it over. So it was the
mhm,
end of his command. Got on a plane. It took him 2 days to get home. Um,
mm,
she was in the hospital at the time. That
mhm,
was probably, and that was the end. That was the end of his deployment. But it
mhm,
was it was a long journey. It was the start of her long journey.
mhm.
With her mental health.
Wow.
And I can say right now she's doing so much better. So
Well, that's a great story, and no doubt having both parents there really, really, really helps. Well, I tell you, you're getting some great reviews. There's great feedback on the book, but I just want to share the back of the book cover now. It's available everywhere. People can buy it from your website right now. So go grab a copy. And your book went #1 on Amazon during the launch recently. And it's called My Year Without Him, The Life of a Military Wife. You probably have copies there you could hold up for us as well, right? So I know you ordered a big stack of books to have to share with family and friends. How did that feel when you got the boxes of books at your doorstep? How was that?
It's kind of surreal. They were heavy.
They were-
My family's like, there's 2 big boxes out here. What is this?
Is that like having a fourth baby? Is that your fourth baby right there?
For sure, for sure. It was, yeah, because I didn't, this is nothing that I like set out. I'm going to be a writer. I'm going to be an author. I really wrote as a means to cope and then decided to publish because I
Yeah.
thought, this could help people understand not only what it's like to be, a military wife, but, the reality of having a successful relationship and kind of what that looks like, the
Yeah.
reality of being a single parent, the reality of, having to do what you don't want to do.
Yeah.
And it really sucks, but you have to do it. That's just the way
So
it
you
is.
have to be mom and dad.
Mhm,
Are
mhm.
there many military moms that deploy and dads stay at home? I mean, what's the percentage there? Do you know off the top of
It's
your head?
a very low percentage. I think it's a little bit more in the Air Force, which that's the branch my husband served and retired from.
Uh-huh.
I think it's maybe like 3% or something like that. It's very
Okay.
low.
Okay.
But I will say, I mean, we knew multiple military, we call them mill-to-mill couples, where both mom and dad were active duty
Oh,
um,
wow.
and had children. So I
So
know.
the kids are more likely to have more absences because both parents are eligible for deployments then in that case?
Yes, but they really try to be in different career fields, I've
Oh, I
found.
see.
So they're not gone at the same time.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And and fortunately for what my husband chose as a career, he's a pilot and he was a helicopter pilot. And so they're actually probably one of the most heavily deployed
Oh, wow.
because they go in and they get people out. That's what they
It's
do.
called My Year Without Him, The Life of a Military Wife. And we're here with Micaela Alexander. And I want to read what you put on the back of the book. And the description says, I didn't know what it was going to feel like until it happened. He left again, off
Again.
to another war zone while I stayed home and worked. I don't like to talk about the emotions because they were so complicated yet so real. I must admit, I was a little angry at him for leaving, but still self-confident and a bit sad because I really didn't know when I would see him again. It was unexplainable. With courage, I would bear this year on my own and come to appreciate the true resilience of our family. My name is Mika. This is my story. I know, Mika, so many moms have been helped as a result of your book. In fact, we got a great review here. I'll just share some of the feedback here that we've been getting. Um, Katie Ackerman says, an honest, down to earth account of what it's like to live in the military. You will smile and shed a tear as you walk with this family through their joys and sorrows, challenges and victories. What is one of the most common things you get feedback on after somebody's read the book, Mika?
Probably, I didn't know all that happens behind the scenes, like as a military spouse. People don't understand like everything that you do, and you do a lot on your own. So I think that's probably the biggest one. And the the other one is multiple people have said, I feel like I'm reading your journal. I'm like, well, you kind of are. I mean, that's what I was doing, right?
Well,
So
that's a cool thing, right? I mean, to me, that would have to be very vulnerable. I think it's harder for guys to open up our heart and journal. I did a lot of journaling after my wife left, but I mean, that's one thing. Journaling's one thing. Putting it out there for the world to read is quite another. So,
yes,
kudos on that.
thanks.
Ilona says, beautiful story. She says, you are a brave woman. Mika, the feedback I've gotten since we've tested this and shared this and launched this, and And I know a lot of people have given us verbal comments and on social media everywhere as well that they're really proud of you for launching this book, and they're really sharing the book. So I know you're available to speak everywhere and to be interviewed on podcasts and radio shows and everything. What's the best way for people to reach out to you and get a hold of you and get you scheduled on their podcast or their show?
Really, all my contact information is on my Instagram, the author Mika, trying to keep it simple. And then my books obviously are available to buy through Beyond Publishing, as well as the authormika.com.
You know, and I'm so excited. You've got the hardcover, you've got the paperback, and you've got the ebook. So take your pick. They're all great, and you're available to sign books. In fact, I know you're wanting to do some book signings. We're working on some book signings in the Dallas area soon. So stay tuned to The Author Mika, and stay tuned to The Author Mika on Instagram, because you're very active on the socials, and it's just so exciting and great to see you empowering women. And particularly, I think what I thought and one reason we wanted to publish this book, I thought about that first young wife who was having her first deployment with, the baby still in diapers or whatever, because I'm sure it doesn't get any easier, but I think that first time has got to be, with the uncertainty, the fear, the doubt, and all that. I think you're helping a lot of women. And so congratulations. Good work.
Well, and it's funny. It's interesting you say that, because my daughter and I were watching this movie yesterday, and it was about back in the day when Iraq first started, and it was about a couple. And I was like, oh my, it took me back. It really took me back, because our kids we were having babies, and he was gone 6 months, home 3 months, gone 4 months, home 5 months, gone 8 months. Like, that was the pace of the war, especially at like 2004 to about 2009, 2010. It was just super intense, and it was very fast paced. And I'm like, wow, I look back at that, I'm all, whoa, like we were busy.
You were. And listen, we want to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts for your service, because it's the whole family that goes into service, right? It's not just the man or the woman. And so living in San Antonio now, this is my second military town to live in. I think people forget sometimes the sacrifice, and your book really shows that. But not only that, you give women hope and some practical how-tos on how to navigate that. And I know every Memorial Day, every Flag Day, every Veterans Day, people are going to be thinking of you. They're going to be thinking about your book, and we're getting some great feedback. And so I'm just really proud of you. You did an awesome job, and the fact that you're willing to speak and available to do interviews and speaking. So thank you so much, Mika, from the bottom of my heart. And I look forward to getting you on some stages with some of our authors this summer and this fall and beyond. And thank you very much for being with us today on the Author Spotlight with author Mika. Grab her book, My Year Without Him. There it is. It's epic. And you'll want to grab a couple and give them as gifts to a mom, a wife that's married to a service member that would really be an encouragement. Thanks, Mika.
All right. Awesome. Bye.